to Bone, Stone, and Obsidian, a Dark Sun podcast.
I'm your host, Jesse.
And I'm Robert.
Well, we're back to talking about and breaking down adventures.
We can't get enough of these adventures, so today we're talking about Raiders of the Chanth.
But before we jump into the adventure, let's talk about Dark Sun news.
So just yesterday, I was on Blue Box RPG. They have a show called Lore Masters Arcanum, which is an interview show. Last month, June was on it, which just reminded me that we should put that link in the show notes. So June was on it last month, and I was on it yesterday. As far as I know, it's just a Twitch show. I should go look to see if it's a YouTube, but I think it's just a Twitch show. But we'll have the link right here. Basically, we just talked about Dark Sun. So if you want to hear me babble more about Dark Sun, check it out.
I can never get enough of that. Over on athos.org, got that Tom Baxa Thri-Kreen drawing popped up. There's been some back and forth also I saw on the Facebook about the poster from the Thri-Kreen of Athos book. So obviously there's still a lot of love for the Thri-Kreen art of Dark Sun, and big booties don't lie.
So that piece of art was a custom piece that Tom did for somebody, and so he put it up on his blog a long time ago. Right before we were interviewing him, I found it, and I was talking to him about it, and I was like, "Oh, I found this on your blog." He's like, "What? Where's that?" And I told him, he's like, "Oh, that blog's not even supposed to be there anymore." So I was like, "Well, can I just take this blog and put it on Athos.org?" He's like, "Yeah." So I grabbed it. So
Beautiful.
It's a really cool picture of a Thri-Kreen with a three-handed sword, which is awesome, huge sword. And so I used that directly, gave my Thri-Kreen Barbarian a three-handed sword in one of my Dark Sun games.
I love the idea of a Buster Sword for a Thri-Kreen. It's great.
Yeah.
Over on the log, there's been a repost about rules from other editions, going back through some of their older material for people who haven't seen it before. And if you've been watching the attendance numbers on places like Reddit and Facebook, you'll see that for the Dark Sun groups, they've been actually climbing. So there is interest. Either people are finding out about our community and joining who were old fans, or newer players are like, hey, what is this Sword and Sandal survival game? I want to get in on that. So this is a great opportunity for folks who haven't seen this before to get a chance to see it for the first time.
Yeah, so Mark gave us permission to repost these. He had just 18 or 20 of them, and we put them all together. Actually, he put them all together in one big PDF, and so they're up in the resources section, but we're just re-releasing his blogs every couple of weeks or month so that people will see them. Hopefully people will learn about them. So he basically fixed up second edition to how he wanted it to be. And so that's what all of that content is. Good stuff.
Yeah, always good to see the ideas from GMs who've actually intersected with the game and run it a bunch. It can be very useful for people who are like running into specific problems or just looking for ideas to fire the imagination. The Athasian Survey Project continues. Project 18 is up. Shazlim and the Dragon's Bowl. Gosh, that's way out there. The Dragon's Bowl, I'm going to try and do this from memory. Dragon's Bowl's a massive depression in the middle of the desert. So it's like you get to the edge of this thing and it drops down hundreds of feet into almost like a reversed mesa. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought it was kind of funny because it's southeast, not far really, southeast of Uruk.
Right.
And south of Yarmu, and it's just like a huge lake down there. There must be some sort of illusion or something going on or the Sorcerer Kings are afraid of, supposedly there's a druid there over the lake. So who knows? It's never really been detailed. I used it in a 5th edition game, but it was set in the Brown Age. They were running from, who was it? I can't even remember who they're running from, but they were running from someone in the Yarmuk area. They went south and they hit that wall, or not the wall, the depression, and so they had to climb down that. It was really fun because I made it like a couple of miles down basically, and so it took a long time to get down, and there's like flying creatures.
Yeah, it's neat too because it's got the nice symmetry. You got the Dragon's Bowl on one end, and you got the Dragon's Crown over on the other, on the far side of it, over to the west. It sort of implies that, this is something having to do with the range of the dragon, or maybe even something geographically that some person was whimsically going like, and this is the dragon, the tail end, and this is the snout.
Yeah, I think there's rumors that the dragon was birthed out of the Dragon's Bowl. All right, there was also another repost of the expanded random encounters, this time of the Salt Flats. So these are just a bunch of little random encounters that are sort of like given a little bit more than just a random encounter. So there's a few of them in each article, so check those out.
Yeah, yeah. One thing about expanded random encounters I'm gonna shamelessly plug here is the Sand Marches project is soon to come out. A lot of Sand Marches is just running into random stuff out in the wild, in the sandy wastes and the stony barrens and the salt flats. And these sorts of random encounter plus can be a really great way to spice that up and put a little twist on stuff that players run into.
Nice. So in the Facebook, Sean Bowman is working on a Pathfinder 2E conversion for Dark Sun, and he posted a work in progress. We'll put the link up there.
Yeah, yeah, we'll add that link to the show notes. I've only sort of dabbled with Pathfinder Second Edition, but it does have a fair degree of aficionados. So he is hungry for feedback. So if you're a Pathfinder 2 fan, you may want to jump on that and read what he's got and get your hooks in there to provide some additional guidance and ideas.
So as usual, Blue Box RPG has been releasing episodes, or been playing, I should say. So we will put a link in there, of course.
Mysteries of Athos is still doing their second edition actual play, and they've gone into part 8, Balak into the Undercity. So you can see that on YouTube and watch them get completely in over their heads as they're dealing with the places beneath Balak.
Nice. Have you? Did you get a chance to watch that one?
Haven't watched that one yet. Gonna try and catch up this weekend. I like Balak campaigns, and they seem to be kind of popular. I think partly because people get, the ancient Greece vibe.
Mm-hmm.
We in the U.S. we study it in school. It's like, this was classical Greece. Now we're going to watch Ben-Hur, and so people get it. And then since it wasn't the subject of a source book, there was a lot of leeway for GMs to just develop it the way they wanted to, do whatever they wanted with the city. So it's really fertile ground where it's in between we have these familiar ideas and hooks, and we have a wide range of stuff that we can make. So I'm eager to see what they did with it.
Yeah. Last month we talked about somebody running through Shattered Lands, I think, and recording it. I went back and looked at that, and it looked like that's the only one they posted, unfortunately. So they haven't posted anything.
Sad to say.
Yep.
Well, consider that a challenge to our listeners.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, right. Nobody is currently doing a YouTube channel where they're doing their actual plays streaming Shattered Lands or Wake of the Ravagers. So now is your chance. Be famous.
There you go.
Internet famous.
All right. Well, let's get on to our adventure. We are reviewing and going through Raiders of the Chanth.
Yeah, first the facts. All right. So this came out in December 1993 in Dungeon Magazine, issue number 44. In keeping with the format of that magazine, it's a fairly short self-contained adventure, just a few pages long, because every episode of Dungeon had 3 or 4 different adventures in it, and they were little anthologies. It was written by Randy Maxwell, who's done a couple of things. Dungeons of Despair for second edition. He did the Northern Wastes for Middle Earth role playing back in first and second edition, and he's written a bunch of articles in Dungeon and Dragon magazines. He's not one of the designers that worked in-house at TSR at the time, but he was a pretty prolific designer for the era. And he's got an entry on RPG Geek if you want to look up his works. We'll include that link in the show notes as well.
And unlike the previous adventures that we reviewed, unfortunately, this one is not one that you can buy. They're no longer available through normal channels because it was really from a time before people considered digital copyrights to these, and so they can't put out any of the old Dragon or Dungeon magazines.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an open legal question of who even owns the rights to it. Like, does WotC own the rights because they bought it? Did the rights revert back to the original writer? Are they in some sort of legal limbo since TSR closed down? I couldn't say. It's this one's billed as an adventure for 4 to 6 players of levels 3 to 6, and they recommend like no more than 20 total character levels. So it's right there in that starter or just after starter range of adventures. It's a pretty short adventure, so probably just a couple of game sessions, a little bit of overland travel, a little bit of hacking in an interior, but it is, I think, really good in terms of just providing some very basic elements of introduction to Dark Sun. It's the sort of thing that you could throw at your players after you've done one of your intro adventures, Freedom or Little Knowledge, and then go, okay, and then some time passes, you got involved in some stuff in the trade routes, and now things happen over here. And a real easy way to do that, of course, is because of the conceit of character trees. You could even have the PCs did their thing in a starter adventure, and then it's like, and now there's other things going on over in this other place, which is where your other characters are. Everybody switched to PC number 2.
Yeah, so this adventure is about raiders from Big Fork Island along the or Big Fork of the estuary of the Siltsea. So they've been swooping down on caravans on the road from Altaric to Grax Pool and Altaric to Gulg. And the interesting thing is that these raiders are riding sail-powered levitating platforms.
Right, it's straight out of like a 60s Hanna-Barbera cartoon. They're chasing Johnny Quest on these little discs with
Totally.
sails that fly through the air. It's fantastic, and it's like it is obviously exactly the sort of thing that characters in Dark Zone would use to navigate the region. These little disc platforms with sails that are psionically held aloft, and your little groups of raiders can just whoosh, fly right over the Silt Sea in order to get to the major trade routes, and then whoosh, fly right back to their home location. So, props to Randy for having a very simple conceit for how the raiders get around that makes sense, and it would be fast and adapted to the terrain and just really fits in with the Dark Sun vibe. They even have illustrations of them in the adventure, which is great. So you can
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
a
Backs of
picture of
his
how
own
they're
adventures.
built.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, oh, this is what it would be like to manipulate one of these things. You could show it to the player and say, this is what they're writing.
So one of the funny things about the introduction to this adventure, it says 4 to 6 PCs of like levels 3 to 5, but then it says the party must include at least one 6th or 7th level Psionicist, or 2 or more lower level multi-class or dual class Psionicists. I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, it's sort of a warning where there is a powerful psionic enemy in this encounter, and if you don't have psionic defenses for the party, it
Yeah.
is very possible for you to get completely boned. So
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that being something where the editors told the writer, oh, you really should put this in here as sort of a warning for the players to be successful. But it's one of those things that's really teetering on the edge of that change in the era that was going on from, well, this is a game where you just go out there and you run into what you run into, and if you're not prepared, you just die, versus
Right.
we're going to give the players a little bit of leeway because they're here to have a good time and they might still die, but we're going to tell them up front, here's maybe a little bit of preparation that you should do.
Right.
Also noteworthy, there's art by Tom Baxa in here, just a couple of bits, but that's always very cool. Both a scene of an adventurer fighting against some Gith and a bunch of the raiders on the aforementioned levitating silt skimmer wind howdahs, as they are called, which do a wonderful job of illustrating exactly what's going on. It's just
One of the cool things about this adventure is it's not sort of like your classic adventure where, A, B, C, D. It just sort of gives you the situation and then it gives you the island. There's really only a few places to look, so it's not like it's difficult, but, it just gives you these places and it doesn't really tell you what's going to happen. It's up to the adventurers to kind of explore the island.
and that's pretty cool because instead of it being like, okay, you're on the rails and you have to do this and then this and then this, which was
Mm-hmm.
really a prominent feature of the flipbook style adventures in Dark Sun's early years.
Right.
In this one, it's just like, okay, there's this hazard, and you're investigating this hazard in order to figure out how you can stop it. And where you want to go or what you want to do is up to you, but there are only so many directions to go. So
Right.
eventually you will find it if you search enough. As a result, it doesn't rely on forcing the players to particularly do anything, but it doesn't put them in a scenario where there are so many options they're paralyzed or they can get completely off track. Really, the only way that the PCs could get off track is if they just decide to leave the island, Big Fork Island, behind completely. And if they do that, then they're going somewhere else. Next adventure.
Right. I could also see a bunch of PCs going, well, what's going to happen with these wind howdahs and what happens when they come back with them? And
Right?
if they were like, if like the people that hired them were saying, well, we want them back, so I could see PCs going, no, we're just gonna take off this way with them.
Right, right. Yeah, look at me. I am the raider now.
Right. It gives a pretty basic introduction. It says that one of the interesting things is that there are gifts with these raiders, and they're becoming more violent. And the raiders don't even care if they incur or inflict damage to their own people. They just leave them, so they're sort of like not necessarily mindless, but they just don't care what happens to themselves, which is cool. Sort of like what's really going on here.
The other neat vibe is that the locals who tell the players about what's going on will mention that the raiders will show up and fight against a caravan, and they'll take supplies and stuff, and they'll take captives, and then later the captives will show up in the next raiding party, apparently just gladly working with them.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going on? And since no one's been able to recapture anybody from the raiding group, they haven't been able to psionically probe them or interrogate them in order to figure out what's happening and how this is occurring.
Another way to start this adventure, instead of just like, here's your job, we're going to give you 500 ceramic pieces and 4 tons of water if you go figure out what's happening. I think it would be kind of cool if, players are on a caravan and this caravan is attacked by the raiders and maybe they lose a PC, take another PC from your tree and go figure out what's going on.
Exactly. If you lean into the idea that characters on the tree know each other, it works really well as like, okay, one of my buddies has got to go and rescue me.
Right.
Yeah, great ideas. The adventure is pretty straightforward because, like you mentioned, there's not a lot to see on the island. You got mountains on the west side. You got an oasis on the north side that has a slowly drying up village there with a water cleric overseeing it. And then you've got an outpost that the raiders use in a thicket, and then you've got the ruins of an ancient tower, which is where the boss lives.
The one other thing you have really is the island random encounters, which I think is pretty cool. Like they've got some beast-headed giants, a gauge, some raider patrols, the flock guards, humanoid giants, giant ants, silkworms, erdloos, kanks. So there's a bunch of stuff that could take a little longer. I think in one of the adventures I had, because the players like just landed on the edge and didn't really want to fly around a bunch, they ran into some beast-headed giants I had living in the mountains. You can stretch out the adventure with those random encounters if you don't want to make them too random.
Definitely potentially dangerous if the PCs spend a lot of time wandering around in the mountains. They could run into things that are tougher than a levels 3 to 6 group really wants to tackle.
That's true, yeah.
And that's great because, okay, run away. That's obviously not where you want to go because the Giants haven't joined the raiding group. They're obviously not part of the raider team. So why stick around to fight them if you don't have to? Beyond that, basically you get 2 major encounter zones. You get the thicket area, which has outpost that has a Gith and a few human raiders. And half of the outpost members are usually out during the day. At nighttime, they come back, and the outpost gives a very simple map where they store a bunch of the wind howdahs. And the humans are essentially, there's humans here that are essentially captives, and raiding this thicket of raiders helps to add a little bit more security to the nearby oasis village, the Duar. It really indicates like, okay, there's something bigger at work here because it's only a small force of guards with a bunch of wind howdahs, and it's like, all right, obviously there's more raiders than this. There's a very basic map for the outpost, which has a watch post and an area full of rubble and whatnot, but pretty straightforward. And what's neat about this is Gith are kind of a staple critter of low-level Athasian adventuring. And so seeing that the Gith are among the raiders or leading some of the raiding parties, but also working with humans, is a little bit offbeat. We know that you can talk to Gith, and sometimes you can even deal with them, but usually they're hostile. And so that, again, raises questions for the players like, okay, well, why are the Gith doing this? What do they get out of this? Why aren't they just fighting the humans and eating people?
Yeah. And of course, if you go to the Dark Tarn Oasis where these kind of humans live, you can kind of find out a little bit of information, but they don't really still know much. They just know that trouble is in the south. Go, following that. There's not a whole lot of information, but it's, a little bit.
One other noteworthy bit about this adventure, I feel, is that the writer really paid attention to how powers work in Dark Sun. There's little suggestions here and there about, oh, this thing happens, and the PCs attack this outpost and they kill a bunch of people, and then this guy telepathically contacts his dude back at the main base to let them know what's happening or whatnot. Or this guy uses control body on one of the PCs in order to try and seize control of them, move them over here. And so it's very cool that the writer actually went out of their way to be like, okay, these are specific things that you are going to see in Dark Sun, and he calls them out and tells the DM, here's how you should use these things.
Yeah.
Anyway, once you get past all of that, you eventually find the ancient ruined tower itself, which is pretty short, 6, 7, 8 rooms, and it's got a bunch of guards in it. You can hack your way through a bunch of low-level human warriors and fight off a couple of Gith. And then there's a bizarro weapon they have. This is really cool, and it's actually illustrated by Tom Baxa. One of
Hmm.
the Gith has the psychokinetic power animate objects. So they took 4 Erdlu legs and then they tie them together and then they tie a big spear to it, and then the guy animates this. So it's this weird multi-legged aberration that's running around trying to stab people with this spear that's attached to it. It's just
Yeah,
bizarre,
it's so
and it's a
awesome.
super memorable encounter.
One of the other strange things is that, like, as you look at, if you're looking at the tower runes, there's these basically area 2 when you come in where you're going to face that Urdu leg spear thing. There's a bunch of little columns, but they're not really columns. They are trees. They are, I think they're stone trees, if I recall.
Oh yeah, yeah. They're shade trees carved out of granite.
Sculpted pillars, right, right, to look like trees at the height of 40 feet, which I thought, is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's neat because it means that as you're coming into that area and potentially getting into fights with the Gith, it isn't just a big flat open, okay, now we're in the middle of the tower and we're fighting. Instead, you've got a whole bunch of cover areas, and so people are going to be darting around cover, using it against missile weapons. And it, again, has that sort of memorable, oh, it's not just pillars, they're these giant shade trees carved out of granite. And this also fits really neatly with the idea that, like, in a lot of Dark Sun adventuring, it often feels like, oh, we found an interesting place that's a layer that someone's in, and then we fought them and defeated them, and now we're going to take this layer for our own. And
Hmm.
you can have this memorable decorative element in your layers. So it's not just it's a ruined tower, but it's like, oh, it's an ancient tower, and it's got this entire colonnade full of these granite shade trees and pieces of art.
And I really like how it talks about that during the daylight hours, the shadows under the trees are even darker because of the sun's bright light reflecting off the white granite. So basically, everything that's shadowed is like super shadowed, which I thought was cool.
Right, and it actually has combat effects, and that
Hmm.
ties in with the bit earlier in the thicket where it's like, oh, there's 1 Gith and 5 humans here, unless it's nighttime, in which case it's doubled, where the time of day that you are attacking these places matters. And if the players are going to stop and do surveillance on an area, they'll notice that there are specific reasons that, like, we may or may not want to attack right now or wait
Hmm.
for the right time, which is a cool, neat little thing. You don't have to. You can just bowl through and attack, but it means that PCs who exercise a little bit of caution and gather intel on the area, they get a payoff. And it also lends itself to some unconventional stuff. Like, I remember someone wrote a thing once where they made a gag about animate shadow being the most useless wild talent that you could possibly get. Oh, it's a character in one of the Dark Sun pieces of fiction, and I'm sure that our listeners know what I'm talking about, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There's a guy who has a wild talent that he can make shadows dance or whatnot. But having the ability to actually manipulate shadow here is suddenly useful because you can
Yeah.
prevent yourself from suffering from the glare effect from these things. And it's like it's such a tiny edge case, but those edge cases, when they do come up, they feel so satisfying to players.
Hmm. So after you go in and get past this few Gith and the animated early legs, and you go in kind of to the main area where you see some of the howdahs off to the side, and then there's like the rest of the slaves. So there's like 25 humans, one of the flock masters, which is like one of the main characters, the leaders from the Dark Tarn Oasis.
Right, and eventually you run into the Gith captain, and they have a little bit of backstory about how this was sort of a very small Gith tribe, which obviously means limited success, and they joined forces with the titular Chanth, seeing it as some sort of powerful entity that could change their fortunes. And the Gift Captain is a pretty rough dude. He's got 7 hit dice, and he has, a good range of psionic powers like Death Field and Aging, stuff that your players do not want to get hit with. So that looks like it's going to be a stiff fight for your typical group of 3rd to 6th level characters. And he's got some buddies with him as well. So that's your big fight, and you finish that, and the PCs are like, whoa, okay, that was a thing. How could things possibly be worse? Well,
Right.
you're about to find out.
Well, before we get there, I thought it was interesting that there is a hidden alcove, concealed doors, and all of the raiders' booty is. And so there's like 50 bottles of perfume worth 250 ceramic, 5 ornate wooden sundials worth 50 ceramic each, 40 bolts of cloth worth 50 ceramic each, and then 8 carved bone harps worth 20 gold each. 20
Yeah.
gold, which I just thought was funny because it's like the most useless stuff. And obviously it says this is what the merchant houses wanted. This is why they hired you in the first place. But I thought it was funny, like they try to make it the most useless thing so that the PCs wouldn't want to keep it.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff where you won't necessarily feel bad about returning it to the merchant houses who are like, "Oh, that's our stuff. That's the goods that were stolen." But you
Right.
still get some payoff because many of the caravan guards got killed by the raiders, or, you killed them in the process of fighting off this group. And they also have a bunch of armor that has been stacked up in this hidden cache, including some leather and padded and hide, all of the stuff that you typically would use, and then like 2 arms from a suit of bronze plate. And you can either return the armor and get 1,500 ceramic pieces, or you can use it or sell it yourself. And this, like for PCs at this level, this might be the first time that they have run across actual
Yeah,
metal armor like this.
definitely.
But it's a great opportunity to introduce your players to the piecemeal armor rules and say, hey, maybe you want to wear these awesome bronze shoulder pieces and gauntlets and bracers and just look like a badass and really be dying in the heat.
Once they kind of deal with that, and they may learn that there is more to this, and there are stairs that go up and down. The stairs that go up are end in nothing, but the stairs that go down end up in the tower ruins, lower rooms. And there's 4 rooms here, and just in the stairs and then the hallway along the outside ring of the tower. And so all the rooms are kind of inside. So you're probably going to go 4, 5, 6, 7. You're probably going to hit each room. The first room, it's not that interesting. It's just food storage, but there says there's like a bunch of Urlu eggs and globules of kank honey and stuff like that. So again, stuff that's valuable, but not necessarily too exciting for PCs.
Yeah, I actually got ahead of myself. The metal armor and stuff is actually in a later storeroom down here. So it's like you've got a storeroom upstairs that has all the stolen goods from the caravan, and then downstairs you got the weapons and armor that they've been using for the guards. So you want to keep exploring and get the goods down there. Yeah, after you run into the group of gift down there, you finally run into the Chanth itself. This is wild. The Chanth is there's a whole section at the start of the adventure that talks about the backstory of the Chanth and how it came to be. The Chanth is a giant orb that has a bunch of amalgamated brains in it that have been magically merged together and kept living and aware. They can communicate internally. They retain some level of their own personalities, but because it's got multiple brains with multiple personalities in it, the Chanth uses its psionic abilities to dominate other people, to function as its eyes and its hands and whatnot. And there are NPCs that it literally calls the hands of the Chanth. It's a super genius, and it has a whole plan for dominating the region by psionically enslaving people and then slowly expanding outward until it controls all the roads around this region and becoming a regional power in its own right. The Chanth is wild. It's multiple pages of how its powers work, what each mind does, how the tactics of this thing should function, what to do if the PCs short circuit it by like, oh, I hit it with feeble mind or forget, and one of these minds has linked up with the other mind, and now it's been affected by the feeble mind power as well. I don't know how you're getting feeble mind at level 3, but whatever. It's definitely a case of the designers thought of everything, because there's all these guidance for the DM about stuff. It's a super complex fight, and it's an interesting boss fight because you got like the 3 major minions of the Chanth here: the hands, the eyes, the voice of the Chanth, that are all dominated, and the Chanth itself. And because it's got so many minds, the Chanth is doing multiple things every round. So it's really a very early experience of a boss fight where the boss is getting to take multiple actions so that it can present a real threat to the party, instead of the standard like, oh, you run into a dragon and everybody attacks it and then the dragon makes 1 round of actions
Right.
and then everybody hits it again. The Chanth is doing a lot of stuff.
I really like how it gives you the mind list. So there are 5 different minds, and it tells you this mind is a human, this one's a dwarf, and it gives all the powers for each mind. And PSPs for each mind, and then it gives you a combat sequence. So round number one, mind one does this. And when I've run this, I probably didn't just do it this way because it's just so, it was too, I definitely used it to reference, but players don't ever do what you think they're going to do. And so kind of have to just do what comes naturally for the round.
Right. And you can't predict how the PCs are going to try and attack it. But this is the reason that they tell you should have a sixth or seventh level psionicist in the group, because it's going to make so many psionic attacks that you had better have someone who is throwing up Intellect Fortress every round while the rest of the party is huddled around them. And it is able to like send tchotchkes flying around the room telekinetically. And then it's in a glass steel globe. It's literal brain in a jar stuff, but you can break it open if you really work at it, and that makes it more physically vulnerable. So like if you have a team and your psionicist is just not doing too well, or he's blowing all of his PSPs just on defense, and it's like, I can't get 3 tangents in order to make contact and shut this thing down, your half giant is just like, all right, Hulk smash, and you bust open the glass steel sphere, and then you just start pulping it like RoboCop going after RoboCop 2. I got a sidebar. One of the things that I love about this is, first off, the basic plot here and the Chanth itself is really reminiscent of this movie many people in the Dark Sun community are aware of, and if they are not, they should be, called Gandahar. It came out in 1987. It's a French animated film. And in the US, it was released as Isaac Asimov's Light Years. Asimov had very little to do with it. The basic story in that one is that the peaceful and idyllic nation of Gandahar is being attacked by these strange metal men that come out of these portals and abduct people and then disappear. So this young member of the city is sent forth to try and figure out where these metal men are coming from and what's threatening their nation. And he eventually discovers this giant mutated brain in the ocean that was an experiment that had been made by Gandahar. And the Chanth in this story is an experiment that was made by one of the defilers working for Androponus. And he talks to the brain, and it's like, yeah, I'm super intelligent and whatnot because I'm a giant disembodied brain, and all I do is sit around and think. And it tells him, okay, the metal men have come through time portals. They've come from the future, and they are raiding your village to get people because they were sent by me in the future. And 1,000 years from now, I've gotten old and I'm dying, and they need fresh living cells to rejuvenate me. And so they're capturing people and harvesting them in order to do that. Take this serum, and I'm going to put you in a trance for 1,000 years, and then you'll wake up in the future, and then find me in the future and use this serum injectable, vial to kill me. Same deal. Giant disembodied brain that was like abandoned as a project from a city state, and now is dominating people and sending them forth as minions to do stuff and whatnot. Like, whoa, okay, obviously someone saw this film, and that gives a warm glow to my black and withered heart.
Yeah, it's a super cool story. Like we were saying, it just gives 3 pages of how to use this character, which is just amazing.
For me as a Fallout guy, the Chanth is very similar to the Master in that it's got multiple different personalities stuck in there that all argue and talk and have different voices through which they will communicate and whatnot. And for those who aren't familiar, the Master was the big boss at the end of the original Fallout game, and it was the result of an experiment gone awry, and then a bunch of people got sort of mashed up by a special engineered virus and turned into this giant sort of goo puddle of a creature that had multiple people within one body. All of these like call outs to this neat like weird fantasy and post-apocalyptic fiction. So what's not to love?
We've been talking about the combat stuff, but it gives a little bit of kind of details of what it's going to talk about. So before you get into combat, you can actually interact with it a little more because it doesn't want to fight. It wants to kind of dominate, continue to dominate people. The couple times I've run this, it's always been a really good role-playing session to talk to the Chanth.
Even then, the text saying each sentence ending with a M dash means a different mind has taken over, and the DM should use a new voice, expression, and body language while continuing. So, like, very simple, solid piece of advice, and then it's got one chunk of box text that it switches through a whole bunch of personalities at once. And you don't even necessarily have to be totally consistent about it. You just want to get across the horrifying idea to the players that like this brain mashup has multiple personalities going on. And it's very clear in the text of the adventure that you can't effectively deal with the Chanth on a diplomatic level. You can talk to it, you can learn more about it, but you are ultimately going to arrive at an impasse. It wants to dominate the region, and it's not going to let something petty like a little group of adventurers get in the way.
It assumes, of course, that you're going to defeat it. Give some details on smashing the globe as you talked about. So once you defeat it, then you've got the treasure, and that's what Jesse was talking about earlier.
Right?
But
Surprise!
You're not done yet because there's another
Nothing is free
here.
in Dark Sun. Yeah. So you're going through finding like all of these chests with cool stuff like scrolls and potion fruits and some extra artwork, a bunch of coinage, some carved bone bracelets, a carved bone scroll tube, some turquoise, onyx, and whatnot. All these little bits of jewelry and coinage that are like they're dribs and drabs. It's not high level adventure rewards, but it's notable, and they are all like, oh, there's artistic value on this sort of thing, and there's a few minor magical items to sweeten the pot, and then you get like, oh, there's good stuff in this chest and this chest and this chest, and what's in chest number 4? It's damp to the touch, and it looks like it has water stains on it, which is really weird for Dark Sun, but it's not a mimic, shockingly. Instead, you open it up, and it's got an Ustilagor inside, which, of course, is a juvenile intellect devourer. So that's why everything's damp, because the intellect devourer is slimy. According to the text, this was in a caravan that was hauling unusual creatures to Tyr, probably for the arena. And then when they raided that, it became the pet for the Chanth, and the Chanth wants to basically turn it into raise it to become its guard dog. If you are like searching around, you're like, okay, well, we got treasure. Oh god! As this thing suddenly leaps out and tries to eat the brain of your psionicist, and presumably the PCs are pretty beaten up from just having fought against the Chanth and all of the gift leaders.
So I like how it talks about like if you can take it relatively unharmed to Altric, you can sell it for a hefty 65 gold piece finder's fee.
Right, which then raises sort of like, well, if we can find a way to keep it captive and unable to attack us, should we heal it up? But if it gets out, it's going to be that much harder to stop it. Yeah, very cool. Overall, the adventure, like, I haven't run it like you have. I get the impression that this is a tough but doable adventure for people who are in the level band, a group of like 6 characters who are, averaging level 4 or 5 among them, with one higher end psionicist. It's like, it's approachable. You gotta pay attention. Some of the fights are going to be pretty stiff. Hopefully your half giant is just mashing people left and right. And the Chanth fight could go very badly if your psionicist has a bad run of luck on his rolls for his power checks.
For sure. In addition, I've had trouble with the Gith at the front there, with the 4-legged thing. That's been a crazy fight a couple of times. 2 times that I've run this, the 2 most recent times, one was online, and so I have a bunch of maps that somebody, actually Nate on Reddit, I forget his name there, he put his maps up there, and he also had some Howdah maps and some other stuff that he gave me, so I will try to grab those and put them together and put them in the resources. I also made a more detailed map of the thicket, and so if you want to use that, the first time I ran it without a map, just did Theater of the Mind or whatever, and then the second time I ran it, I ran it online, used that map, and I just thought it was cool.
Speaking of, the adventure even has a little conclusion section where it talks about, okay, what's next after you've done this? So first, assuming you didn't play a totally evil party and just put the entire Duar village to the torch, you get honorary membership in the Duar. So this is great. Your PCs now have a base of operations. You can hang out in a village that has a trickle of water and a water cleric. You get special armbands that denote that you are friends of the Duar, so everybody's like, oh, those are the heroes that helped us. And the giants in the region know and respect this. So now you run into those beasthead giants, you show them your armband, and they're like, oh, okay, you're with the villagers. It's cool. So you get your tiny little safe zone in the middle of the estuary of the Forked Tongue. You may have your floater levitating wind howdahs still. So you can use this as your base as you travel to areas around the region. And then some of the NPCs that
Mhm.
got dominated by the Chanth, if you freed them instead of killing them, they have very brief backstories. But like one of them is from Tyr, and the other one is from some of the liberated villages in the Mechalot Mountains near Gulg, and both of them are willing to help you out. One of them is also like literate and is able to deal with ancient languages and old maps and things like that. So it's like a perfect setup of you now have a tiny base of operations from which to launch your next adventure. Is that adventure going to be in Tyr? Is it going to be in the wilds of the Mechalot Mountains? Is it going to be chasing down this defiler that the Chanth had dominated, and then once he gets out from under the dominate, he doesn't care about what you have to say, and he's like, I'm out of here. And they're like, oh no, we have unleashed a defiler upon the world. We'd better tie up that loose end. And then you have even a small section of suggestions about what happens if the PCs fail and they get enslaved by the Chanth. And then, okay, how do you get a new group to go in and deal with this problem? Or, one of the PCs manages to escape because he was in a raid while dominated and gets knocked out and then left for dead and suddenly wakes up and he's not dominated anymore. And then he can go back and be like, oh no, here's what happened. And then bring a new team to directly deal with it. So very, very tight. Great job by the writer here in providing you with threads to send you off on your next adventure as a result of what happened here, giving you a cogent feeling not only that you got monetary rewards, but that you made friends with the community and there's a payoff for that, and a little bit of emergency planning for if things go really sideways,
Mhm.
here is a couple of suggestions to get things on track.
Instead of having the players fight the Chanth and kind of figure all the stuff right here in this one little adventure, already make the Chanth bigger. So so they are already kind of controlling maybe some of the nearby villages, maybe even Altaric or something like that. And so like make it a bigger deal than just this one island and just this few Gith.
Yeah, absolutely. You could turn this into a much longer story arc where you start on this island and you have to deal with Gith and things like that, but the Chanth isn't at the old tower. Instead, one of its powerful minions is there, and you defeat that minion, you get your wind howdahs, and now you start exploring in neighboring islands and lands along the estuary of the Forked Tongue and trying to track down where is it attacking next, who recently got raided, how can we track them back to their base, and finding all of these ostensibly disparate groups of raiders all across the region, yet each of them is ultimately reporting to some mysterious greater leader that you have to finally track down. And as the PCs gain levels, they get into more dangerous territory, maybe having to deal with some of the more dangerous giants, or even going as far afield as to go to Ladopolis and talk to the dwarves there, and raiders attacking the bridge while it's under construction. You can have a really interesting battle like set up with
Mhm.
that, and eventually going like, okay, we think we finally tracked this down to wherever it is. Like you were saying, maybe even in Altaric, if the Chanth successfully manages to infiltrate and take over Altaric, you could
Yeah.
do almost sort of a invasion of the body snatchers sort of story in Athos, where it's like there's this region where people are getting weird and stuff's getting controlled by some unseen power that is taking over people's minds.
One thing I don't think we really went into detail with, we just sort of mentioned, is that there's a whole page
Mm-hmm.
on the Winhoudas. So it gives like the top view of it, the side view, and then there's several paragraphs of details about it. So it talks about like how it's made, kind of what it looks like, and then just gives lots of details like how quickly it can raise and lower, how fast it goes. Which it's not really
Yeah, it's
made
kind of a
for kind of
skimmer.
aerial combat. It's more made to just take you there, and it can carry you like up to like 1,500 pounds or something like that. There's just a lot of details, which is cool. So like once you're using them, you kind of know what it can do.
Yeah, and I think this is great because it's another case where the writer sort of foresaw that, oh, these are really useful for PCs getting around in the estuary of the Forked Tongue and the Silt Sea and whatnot. And they open up travel opportunities in interesting ways. So obviously, we're going to give you a little more detail about them. And for low level gameplay, you can lean into this a lot and be like, okay, you guys have captured a bunch of wind howdahs by defeating some raiders, and now you're exploring the region to find the mysterious mastermind. But oh, you get caught in a silt storm while you're going across the estuary, and you've got to
Mhm.
get to shelter before the silt flays the skin from your bones, and it's damaged the hides that are built on the framework of this thing. So you got to repair them. So now you got to go and find the resources in order to fix these things. You can get driven to ground on an island you haven't explored yet, and like, okay, we found a cave, but what already lives here? It introduces all of the perils of vehicle gameplay, and you can be as light or as heavy-handed with it as you want. Yay, the PCs have a way to travel across the Sea of Silt very quickly and efficiently. Huzzah! Or, okay, your Corvega broke down, and you got to go and find the parts and repair it before you can continue your journey.
Yeah, yeah. We also kind of glanced over the sort of background, which I just thought was cool. Like it gives a good column and a half or 2 columns of details of like how the Chanth was made and why it's there now.
Right. The aforementioned experiment by one of the defilers working for Androponus of Balak. And then, of course, when the Chanth killed its creator, Androponus just sort of shrugged and said, oh, well, it was just a side project. Who cares? And it gets dumped and then begins its reign of terror. Yeah, it's neat because it leans simultaneously into
Mm-hmm.
the characters that you meet have stories. They came from somewhere, and there are reasons for what they are doing. The Chanth was created as an experiment designed to do a certain thing, and then it has its own goals and it wants to dominate the region. And then the people that it's dominated were folks who had jobs and connections in different regions, and now they're being used by it. But if you free them, you can lean on those jobs and connections, like I mentioned before, to get your next adventure thread. But at the same time, you've got like the ancient tower with the columns of granite that are shaped like giant palm trees. Where did this come from? We don't know. It's an artifact of the ancient world. So some elements of it's like this is the recent local history, and there's details about it because you can find out that stuff. You talk to the Chanth and learn its history. You free these people and you learn what they used to do. But you get into the tower with all the artistic carvings and stuff like that. Where's this from? The ancient world. It is a mystery. Very Dark Sun.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we've hit like an hour already. For such a short adventure, I didn't know we would go that long.
Yeah, any last words on Raiders of the Chanth?
Obviously, in the realm of Dark Sun, there are no pirates, so getting your hands on it may be difficult for DMs out there, but I have seen copies of Dungeon going on eBay, and if you ask people like Robert nicely, they might be able to introduce you to some of those maps that other people made and whatnot, and then you can sort of follow along. Okay, here's how this works, and dig into this for ideas, even if you're not using the exact material as presented. I think that this is a very, very worthy adventure. It is a great example of an early Dark Sun adventure that gives the players a clear direction, a little bit of leeway, a sense that there's specific things going on in this region, and ultimately an interesting antagonist to face down, as opposed to some of the early flipbook adventures, which were maybe not so much that.
Yeah, I really like how, again, it just sort of gives you this little region, right? Tim Brown talked about how he wanted to like drill down and really detail the tablelands. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you look on the map, you can see this Big Fork Island. And so this kind of details that island. So I love that aspect of it. I love just that it gives you, again, just the whole island, gives you the details about the door, the people, and what happened to them, and the giants and the Gith, like what they're all doing, what they've been doing. So it's just a cool little, like just a little situation that your PCs get involved with, which I really like.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
And then just the adventuring and the locations are pretty cool. And there's the whole tree thing that's all super cool. But then when you go down, it's just like these 4 rooms that are kind of bland, really. If I could change one thing, it would probably be how that works. The end
Punch up
game
the
would be
basement a little bit.
yeah.
I feel like they sort of ran out of word count
Yep.
at the end. And it was
That's
like,
exactly
we
right.
don't have enough column text to make these rooms super interesting because we've got all this stuff about how the Chanth works and
Right.
the history of the region and the characters and whatnot. Yeah, beyond that, solid stuff. And I think this is inspirationally great for DMs to say, take a little unexplored spot on the map, like the Mud Palace or something, and go, okay, I'm going to drill into this. Actually, that reminds me. So my old boss and mentor Tim Kaine from the original Fallout has been doing a bunch of videos on YouTube talking about game design. And he recently did a video about Judges Guild, and we'll put the link in the show notes. And one of the things he talks about in this video is how Judges Guild has, in City State of the Invincible Overlord and some of their other supplements, they have this section where they have these maps, these hex maps that are like 1 square is 10 feet. And then the next hex map is 1 square is 500 feet. And then the next one is like 1 square is, half a mile or whatever. So you're getting like really fine details on areas of interest, like a village or whatnot, and then it's sort of zooming out to the region. And this has that same sort of feeling. It's like you've got this island area and you have a general idea of what the island is like, and then it really drills in and focuses on the specific areas of interest, the douar, the thicket, and the tower itself. And it's got weird ideas, the Chanth itself, the Erdlu leg spear monstrosity thing, in addition to more conventional combat with, Gith warriors and human warriors and things like that. So it gives you that nice mashup. And I feel like that's a really great inspiration for DMs who are looking for, oh, I want to make a Dark Sun adventure. I'm going to just take an area on the map. I'm going to drill down to this specific spot and give a lot of interesting detail to it. I'm going to have some conventional encounters and a couple of weird encounters. And then I'm going to sort of zoom out and give some more general notes about the area around it.
Yeah, and like we've mentioned, but I just wanted to bring it up again, I really like how he puts details about how they use their psionics, right? Like, so psionics at this sort of level is new to the game. And so having details of like how the characters use the psionics, I think is super cool. We were just talking about that on the Lore Masters Arcanum, just that, I kind of feel like psionics would be, even if they're not as, not super, super common, I feel like there would just be more to the society about, that had to do with psionics. And so I really love the animated creature, because that's something that I could see, developing.
Right. And the Chanth itself is a purely psionic entity, a bunch of brains mashed together and telepathically in communion with each other and sharing their powers and psionic power points. And these are all natural consequences of psionics being a pillar of the Dark Sun setting. So it's really great to see that it's more than just, and here's another adventure against some marauding humanoids, where psionics matter, and there are places where there's call-outs about what psionics powers will be used and what they do, and they're central to the plot.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for going over this with me. It's one of my favorite adventures.
Yeah, always a great time. I highly recommend giving it a read through for anyone who's able to dig up a copy.
For sure. So, Jesse, where can we find you online?
Well, I'm still on the Facebook Dark Sun group, and I also have my own Twitter account under my name, Jesse Heinig, and I'm now on Blue Sky as well. Same deal, Jesse Heinig at Blue Sky. And how about you?
You can still find me on Twitter occasionally. You can find me at the arena at athos.org. I'm now on Blue Sky, thanks to Jesse, the Dark Sun Facebook page. I've also, if you want to play some Dark Sun, I'm just started a couple of games at startplaying.games. One of them is a 5th edition version of Ashes of Athos. Characters are just about 4th level by now. I actually started them at 1st instead of 3rd, and I really should have started them at 3rd. It was hard to tone down the adventure.
Yeah.
But they made it. And then I have another game that hasn't really started yet. We've got 2 players, so the next player will kind of trigger it to start. But that's going to be another version of the Dark Days of Tyr. So another kind of Tyr-focused campaign.
Fantastic. Yeah, this guy knows what he's doing. So if you're jonesing to get your Dark Sun fix, head over to Start Playing and sign up.
Thanks, Jesse. Have a good night.
Thank you, Robert. Have a good one. And all of our listeners, will talk to you again soon.